Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in his own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests, the podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Simon is the co-founder of Fundraising Everywhere, a recovering fundraiser, coach, mentor, trainer, keynote speaker, podcast delighter, and lovable imp. Fundraising magazine named him one of the top 20 most influential fundraisers. He's also won Fundraising Ireland's Small Budget, Big Impact, and Supplier of the Year awards, Eircom's Startup Award, and was a 2019 finalist of Charities Institute Ireland's Communication Agency of the Year. He's a TEDx speaker and has previously won the Toastmasters UK and Ireland International Speech Contest. He holds a diploma in fundraising and a certificate in fundraising and is working towards a degree in theology. Well, welcome, Simon.
Thank you. It's so cringe listening to your own introduction, isn't it?
I'm sure. So you've been in the fundraising world for quite some time now, and you've seen it evolve, maybe not as fast as you had liked. So tell me kind of what you see the future, the next kind of 10 years of fundraising. How is it going to be different than how we fundraise today?
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to think what the world will be in 10 years, and then you can't even begin to think how fundraising will fit into that. I mean, like I started fundraising 20 years ago, and obviously that's a very junior position, but I haven't seen a whole lot change. People talk about it changing a lot, and I think the technology changes and some of the methods changes, but the thinking behind it just doesn't change, and I think the conversations I was having 20 years ago on the streets in Australia fundraising are the same conversations donors are having today. They might be talking differently about how they do their gift and differently about what they want to achieve, but the reason people give and the reason the fundraising profession exists, I haven't seen that change much, and I don't really see that changing as long as our society behaves like this, that we're as fundraisers are operating in a system where we're trying to fill a gap that probably should be filled by someone else or by some other means. There shouldn't be that gap. So I don't know. I think as long as the world is as it is, as long as it's like a capitalistic society, and these services that are so important and these organizations that are important, as long as they have to subsist by themselves, I think fundraising will be the same. They'll still hire fundraisers. I mean, I love fundraising, but to be honest, it is a job I would like to see become extinct. Like it's not a great thing. And I think like people talk about fundraising like it's really excited about the future of fundraising. But, for me, it's like, as much as I love fundraising, I think we should be trying to do ourselves out of jobs, and I think so. I think some people would disagree with that. And I'm sure there's exceptions that I'm just not smart enough to think of yet, that people will point back and I'll be like, oh yeah, that makes way more sense. But for me, it's like, I would like to see fundraising change in that it becomes less and less necessary, and that's how I would like to see it evolve. But in terms of what we're doing day to day, I think it's going to be the same things. We're going to have different tools, AI and tech and things are going to change it slightly. But our job as fundraisers is to connect the people who want to help with the people who need the help. And our job is to kind of fulfill everyone's dream within that. We're just like a bridge in between. And because fundraisers are a bridge, it's like I just don't see much change coming. We'll hopefully get more professionalized, but I think that's always been happening because that's the nature of the work we do. It's just we all progress slowly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they're called Imagine Canada now. I knew them kind of growing up as the Canadian Centre for Philanthropy, and they said if everyone gave 1% of their income to charity, whether you're the, Bill Gates of the world or whether you're the guy struggling to make ends meet, they actually wouldn't need charities. If everyone, including corporations, if everyone gave 1%, and you kind of sit back and you think about it, well, what jerk is going to say that I can't live on 99% of my income?
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially what you're seeing people earn now. We're seeing more and more people crossing that billionaire. And without straying too far from fundraising, it's like, how much money does anyone need? And I'm a big believer. I started, following this kind of movement ages ago about maximum income. Like the minimum wage, there should be a maximum wage that. And whenever I've said anything like that online, you get a lot of people, even within the sector, who really push back on that, because they think it stifles. But I don't think the person who earns $1 billion is going to be less creative and genius if they earn, like $1 million less than that. I don't think that's going to demotivate them to the detriment of the world. So I don't know. I think that's where the solution is going to come from. It's not going to be from like professional fundraisers or volunteer fundraisers grinding the lower and middle class. Like something systemic needs to change, where this like huge collection of wealth out there that's just sitting there, where we can start to tap into that. And that's a maybe difficult truth and something we don't want to talk too much about, because as fundraisers we kind of feed into it a little bit. We almost support it a little bit, because we hold these giant donors in high regards just because they gave some crumbs away, in terms of what they have. And so it's an uncomfortable place we're in, because I do think we kind of feed into and support the problem. Like, we are a plaster, we are a Band-Aid, as the North Americans might call it, but at the same time you need Band-Aids and you need plasters until that systemic changes. So I believe in what we do, but there is a strange element to it where we're feeding into a little
most
bit
definitely.
of the problem.
If you were kind of analyze some of your donors for an organization, the folks that give the Uber gifts, as a percentage of their wealth or income, it's much, much less than, I always use a teacher. And a teacher who gives X amount of dollars, as a percentage of what they earn, it's much higher than the billionaire. So they feel that gift a lot more, and yet they aren't celebrated on the same level, right?
I mean, it's really embarrassing sometimes to see how we celebrate the rich when they give 100,000 or even $1 million. But like that, when you break it down as a percentage, like they don't notice that. They don't notice that for a second. And so it's like, it's not to begrudge that, but it's really like, there's a problem here, where people are really struggling and still trying to help, and they're just being like pushed aside and they're just being ignored from every angle. And I mean, that's a big thing to change. But I guess as fundraisers are, we have to feed into it a little bit. We have to work with the system a little bit. But it is good to see more and more people speaking up about this difficult power dynamic that you get with the wealthy, with your major donors and things like that. We've got way more people who are very vocal about it, even within nonprofits, and they historically keep their head down. It's like, don't mention it because it's going to disrupt our own fundraising. So usually you only see those arguments coming from like consultants and agencies and things like that who are comfortable. But we're seeing it more and more where people who are disempowered, people who don't have the power, people who are within nonprofits, who are vocalizing and say, like, the way you're, donating is wrong. The way you're, making us jump through hoops is wrong. The way you're looking for this recognition is wrong. And you are, no matter how much money you give, you are creating this problem over here, so it doesn't matter what you give. You can't just like greenwash it or whitewash it. So that's encouraging that we're seeing more people call it out, and therefore people reacting to that and dynamic changing. But that's a slow process. That's a change I would like to see, and then we'll see what that does to fundraising.
Well, so much of the fundraising that I like is that relationship fundraising. I've been in shops that have obviously the direct mail and the telefunding. I could just never get excited personally. There are other people who love that world, and you take a look at a 3 or 4% success rate from a direct mail, and they're jumping through hoops, and I'm like, where else is 3 or 4%? If I got that on a test, no one's going to say that's great. So it just doesn't personally excite me. But these relationships you have that last a long time, and you really are privileged to kind of be brought into the donor's kind of inner world and inner thinking. And I've learned so much from donors, just, on a wide variety of things, not even necessarily fundraising. So tell me about some of the lessons that you might have learned in your experiences from a donor that you didn't necessarily appreciate going in.
Yeah, I think donors really taught me, especially in face-to-face, they taught me to not make assumptions, and I hear that from a lot of fundraisers, especially street fundraisers, like not judging the person because they're, not, very surface level, because they're not dressed well. It doesn't mean they're not a wealthy person, and because they look grumpy or because they don't smile at you, it doesn't mean they're not a friendly person. So I think you learn that a lot from donors, but more specifically about how they give and their decisions. And I find that interesting. And I think you have to find it interesting to survive in fundraising, is that curiosity for how everyone's mind works and how they make their decisions. And I do love that. Like when you come from someone, they've been on, we talk about donor journeys and we plot our donor journeys in the minute, but they've been on that donor journey for 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, and it goes all the way back to how they were raised, how their parents taught them about philanthropy, what they cared about, how their friends treated them, big incidents through their life shapes everything that happens in that conversation with you. And I think that fundraising has really opened up my eyes to that. It's like, well, fundraising and therapy have opened up my eyes to that, where people come, they have led a very different life from you. So you can't assume they know anything that you know. And at the same time, you can't assume you know everything they know. And so the learning from that is questions, questions. And fundraising, I find myself coming back to that so often. It's like when in doubt, it's like ask the donors. You don't have to guess how much they can afford to give. You don't have to guess what they're interested in. And people I've seen people, and I've done this, taken that to extreme levels where it's like, before you send out an appeal and you're deciding between two things, you can ask donors what do they think of these two appeals. If you know a donor well enough, you can bring them into that appeal decision thing. And I really love that. I love that you can ask questions. One of the first things, if I've worked with smaller charities who haven't mailed their mailing list for ages and they don't know what to say to their mailing list, usually what I'll get them to do is I'll email the mailing list and say, hey, can I just ask you, why did you join the mailing list in the first place? And it's like, there's no content there. There's no brainstorming about how to type this email. It's just a simple question. But the engagement and the responses you get and the learning you get about your donors is huge. It's more than you could get from 100 meetings with your team trying to get into the donor's head. It's like, just ask them. So for me, that's been like reinforced throughout fundraising, and every donor's taught me that. And there's a lesson every time you ask questions, because people surprise you. I love asking these questions because people will come out with things which you just never even considered before, and it's fascinating. But it just gives you a deeper insight into how they think. And then our job as fundraisers is to kind of move that around and understand how it slots into what we're doing. And I love that. I love that part of it. It
totally empowers them. There's nothing better than asking a donor's advice. There's that great adage, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And it works. Like, honestly, it truly works. Simon, this has been absolutely amazing. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, the best way to find me is at fundraisingeverywhere.com. So Fundraising Everywhere is our online community for fundraisers. We do a lot of training, a lot of information resources on there for fundraisers. So fundraisingeverywhere.com, I'm always floating around there. But otherwise, LinkedIn is actually my social media of choice now that Twitter or X is starting to fade off. I spend less time on social media now,
amazing.
But if you're going to find me,
thank you so much, Simon, for your time.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.